Hello! In the last video, we covered the most essential bubble of healing chronic pain, the foundational one, nervous system capability. If you haven't watched that video, I do suggest going back and watching that first, because this one will add onto it. Now, as I mentioned in that video, there are 2 more bubbles required to complete our Venn diagram. And I am asking you to use your imagination here. Forgive my poor technology skills. Eventually I'll have slides up and make this pretty. But really just imagine what a Venn diagram looks like, right? With 3 overlapping circles. In this case, I refer to them as bubbles because they hold more and they're so much more dynamic than like a static Venn diagram. But, right, when they're overlapping, as we discussed, that is when we can become a self-partnered powerhouse. No longer hopeless to pain, and finally free to move about our day as we desire. As we desire. That right there is already such an interesting phrase, isn't it? And it's going to tie in perfectly here. Because here's the thing. In the conversations I've had with hundreds of women with chronic pain, one of the most consistent things I hear is that they just want to be able to have the freedom to do what they want to do. Can you relate? Is that something you want too? And then here's the thing. When I ask the follow-up question of, what is that you want to do then? I'd say it's pretty 50-50 to what I hear next. Either they know what they want. It might be things like get out in nature, go hiking, get back to painting, go for a run, play with their kids, get back to yoga or spontaneous road trips, or maybe just be able to go to the movies and know that they could sit through it without pain. And just so many more gorgeous answers I've heard. And the other 50%, and that's the category I fell into, they're stumped. I was stumped. They can't even think of what it would look like to have that sort of freedom. But they want it. They desire it. And here's the thing. First off, which category do you fall into? And second off, no matter which one is your answer, you're exactly where you're meant to be right here, right now. Now, let's bring back our analogy of baking a cake. To me, acting on desires we have is an ingredient. Knowing what our desires are, that's another ingredient. Now, let's assume, like most cakes have, flour and sugar in it. Does the order of which you put in matter first? No, at least not as far as I'm aware. You just need both, right? You can even put in a little flour and then a little sugar. It all gets mixed together anyways. So sometimes in baking, the order does matter. We do know that. But in some steps, it really doesn't. And this is one of those examples. Whether or not you know what your desires are or exactly what you would do, don't worry about it. The order here doesn't really matter for this instance. Okay, take a breath and let's actually step back and take an even bigger view. What is the first thing we need when baking a cake? A recipe, right? This is the broad overview. And in this case, our recipe is the overarching intention here to transform your relationship with pain so you can remove the burdens and costs of pain from your life. Does that sound good? And when you do that, you can be free to move about your day. Again, whatever that looks like. And whether you know is, as we just established, it's irrelevant right now. But within the idea of recipes, how many cake recipes exist? Probably infinite, right? Literally the possibilities are endless. Sure, some might have a lot of similarities or similar ingredients, but no 2 need to look the same. And that is so important here because this journey you're embarking on, it's unique to you. More unique than cakes can probably do the justice of representing here, okay? But where everyone ends up on this journey is going to be completely different. That's why within the Unweaving Chronic Pain program, the goal is definitely never, ever to try to assume or tell you what your life should look like. The goal is for you to discover a life that feels amazing for you. And this is where the other two bubbles come in. And in no particular order. They are the self-knowing bubble and the chosen action bubble. In brief, self-knowing has two main parts. There's more than that, but two main parts that we're going to touch on today. First, it is your connection and your knowing of your true self. This is the part of you that is not influenced by society, people-pleasing, perfectionism, fear, or even your chronic pain. This includes what is aligned for your life, such as your soul purpose, but it also includes things like truly knowing which kind of cake you even want to bake. Not which one you think you're supposed to bake because it's healthier, what your mom loves, or your kids like best. It applies both to the little things like what cake you might want to date, but those big things like your soul purpose, your mission, what legacy you want to leave this world, if that's even a thing you even want. Maybe you don't, because that's totally fine as well, right? Now, the second part of self-knowing is the actual education and understanding of how our body, brains, and nervous system physiologically work. With the amount of external information, programming, and misinformation that is out there, it's important to make sure that you do have a clear understanding of your body. And that's why there is education included within the Unweaving Chronic Pain program that can ensure that everybody has the same understanding of how our bodies work. All right, so that was the self-knowing bubble. Next, we have the chosen action bubble. Chosen actions are what someone would see if they followed you around with a video camera. It is what you're doing or what you aren't doing in your day. No judgment, stories, or analyzing needed. It's basic objective fact of what is happening in your life, or literally what actions are being taken. Don't overthink that one. Let's bring in the cake analogy again here. How many people are going to be hungry after watching this, by the way? All right, let's say you got deep into the self-knowing. You did the inner work. You've explored. You've chosen the recipe that feels most aligned to you. You've shed the layers of societal programming and found something that sounds delicious. And then you spent all day visualizing it, feeling it, mentally tasting it, journaling on about what it's going to taste like, exploring what it would be like to make that cake and then eat it. But you never freaking made the cake. Guess what? You have no cake. Self-knowing is crucial. It is so important. But so is actual action. All right? Now, let's say you did take action. Let's say you were busy all day long. You were going. You've cleaned the car. You helped your kids with homework. You sent out emails if you're a business owner. You've done all the tasks on your to-do lists. But you still never did the action of baking the cake. You still don't get cake. Can you see where these bubbles need to overlap to get the intended result? Not only do we need to have a self-knowing of our desires, but we also need to be able to take chosen actions that are actually aligned and will give you the outcome you're looking for. This is so key. And it sounds so simple and obvious, but I cannot tell you how many times I see people taking action that will never get the outcome they're hoping for. And often it is not intentional. Now, when those two are aligned, when self-knowing and chosen action is aligned, that's when we get to have a chance at the outcome we are looking for. All right, now let's bring in nervous system capability again. You remember that bubble? So let's say we actually made the cake. Those two bubbles were aligned. But what happens if it was actually so beyond our nervous system capability to make it? And it actually ended up just putting us in a massive nervous system trauma reaction. Sure, the cake does get made, but we might then be in such a fight, flight, or freeze response that we never get to eat or enjoy it. And then when we start to bring this back into the body, what does this all mean, right? Let's take it out of cake here for a second. It means our nervous system is staying sensitized, and our chronic pain is going to persist even if you are aligned with chosen action and aligned with self-knowing. Both of these bubbles maybe could be expanded out and overlapping, but if you lack the nervous system capability to hold this, we still end up in pain. Now, where does this show up most commonly? This is often when someone is jumping into an exercise that might actually technically be safe for their body, like there's no physiological reason why they couldn't do it, but it's not perceived as safe according to their nervous system. So the nervous system is going to retaliate in the best way it knows how to stop you. Pain. This can also show up when trying to do things that are supposed to regulate your nervous system, but frankly, end up just making it freak out, like breathwork, meditation, or journaling. Again, the action itself could be happening, and maybe the action actually is one that is aligned for you, but the nervous system capability is just not expanded enough to hold it. Can you start to see how we need all three of these bubbles to be considered? Now, of course, there are really endless scenarios we could play with here, because not only are we talking about the overlap of the bubbles, we're actually talking about the size of them, because they can shrink and get really small, and they can expand out as our lives expand out. But we're going to give a few more just to further illustrate what it can look like when different bubbles are of different sizes or overlapping. All right, so without the self-knowing, that bubble's over here, really tiny somewhere, okay? That's when we pick a recipe we don't even like or want. Sure, the cake gets made. Maybe you have, again, the chosen action is big. You're taking the action here, and the nervous system capability bubble is big. They're overlapping just fine. It was totally within both of those capacities, no problem. But you don't get to enjoy it. It's not even a cake you like. What does this look like in actual reality? Well, it can often look like people who on paper are really successful. Often others might be wondering how they do it all. Maybe they're the mom at the PTA meetings with kids who are always perfectly dressed with perfect, adorable little lunches. Or maybe it shows up as the highly successful entrepreneur running a 6-figure business with a waitlist. But what tends to happen? Well, if you happen to relate to either of those examples or something else entirely for yourself, you end up waking up one day and wondering why life feels so off track. Wondering how you got here and why you feel so miserable and unhappy, even if on paper you have it all. Something feels off, and your body is ensuring you pay attention by sending a message to you. And how does it send that message? You guessed it. Pain. This also might show up directly with chronic pain when you have someone taking all the actions, like going to different body workers, doing stretches and exercises, but ultimately they are not the right providers or practitioners for what their particular body needs. I'm going to give one super common example. Someone with hypermobility who is seeing chiropractors, massage therapists, and doing a ton of yoga. I'm making a blanket assumption here, but it is probably not aligned with what their body needs. They're missing the self-knowing that can only be gained through the self-knowing, both from a internal self-knowing, but also an actual understanding of what a hypermobile body needs in that particular case. Now, this is when we have the nervous system capability bubble and the chosen action bubble expanded. That's what we just talked about. But we lack the self-knowing. Or, I gave the example above of when we have the self-knowing and the nervous system capability bubble expanded, but lack action. That's when we spend our life stuck in inner work and thought work, but forget to take action. I actually see this really commonly within the healer and coach world, especially if you happen to be one of those. Pay attention to this one. See if this feels true. Maybe you can visualize enjoying the hell out of your cake, but you lack the lived experience. And your body, again, will let you know this. It will cry out in pain because it is longing for the whole human experience. Or maybe you can help your clients all day long achieve the life they want to live, but your life, well, that's another story. And this is so common. I've worked with so many practitioners and coaches who fall under this. So you are not alone here if you're relating to this one. Now, this can also present as someone who spends so much time perfecting posture, form, ergonomics, or setup of things to ensure things don't risk a possible flare-up. Life always feels like you're in the preparation mode, or that I'll be able to do that once X thing has occurred mode. That might be another example of if your nervous system capability bubble and your self-knowing bubbles are aligned, but you're lacking the actual action piece. So far, do any of these sound familiar? See if you're relating to any of them. Now, lastly, what tends to happen the most in chronic pain? All of the bubbles are just small and not overlapping. Often what happens is our chosen action bubble lives inside a tiny, if you can have two bubbles here, inside a tiny nervous system capacity bubble. So it's actually like the chosen action is within another bubble, if you can picture that, right? So that does not look like a Venn diagram anymore. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off my phone, so excuse the dings. And the self-knowing bubble, it shrinks too. Maybe it happens to overlap sometimes, but more often than not, you lose yourself. Or, I mean, they really could all literally be overlapping on top of each other, but they're all very small. All right, and that is what we see most commonly with chronic pain, especially chronic pain that goes on with time. Unfortunately, the harsh reality is time does not heal chronic pain. In fact, most chronic pain becomes a vicious cycle of your world shrinking. You start to do less and less. Sometimes it's really obvious and you're very aware of this. Other times it can actually be really sneaky and happen slowly. So you don't quite notice how much of your mobility or strength or just function you've lost. Or maybe you even are able to kind of start writing off these losses due to age, which, by the way, I could get on a soapbox about age, but when it comes down to it, I have literally spoken to 25-year-olds who blame their age. In fact, I remember once I had an 18-year-old athlete blame age, while later I had a 92-year-old woman who did archery, gardened, ran up and down stairs with no issue. So, frankly, the age thing, it's a ridiculous notion. I'm not going to go off on it. I did a little bit. Okay. Or maybe you're chalking the shrinking up to things like time, money, energy, for not participating in activities you once loved. It's kind of easy to just be like, oh, okay, I'll do that later, right? But over time, what happens is your world dulls. Muscles atrophy. We lose range of motion. All of a sudden, we can't get up off the floor anymore. And often with this, you lose a sense of yourself as well, of what you did once enjoy. It can even be hard to touch back into that person. Because of this, you're gonna stick to actions that feel completely safe, and this is where this this vicious cycle continues, right? Because a lot of times to do things that are outside of that could literally be a risk, or you're putting yourself at risk for injury or falling or being in a scenario that just does not feel safe. So we have to shrink our worlds, right? And what happens over time, you run out of things that feel completely safe and comfortable because frankly, there's not that many because, hello, chronic pain. But here's the thing. Remember I spoke about these bubbles overlapping like a Venn diagram. They don't need to be completely on top of each other. In fact, we actually do not want them to be always aligned. That's why I chose this Venn diagram example, because to become a self-partner powerhouse, they're not all on top of each other. You just have a triple Venn diagram, right? Just parts of them that are overlapping. We don't want actions to always be within our comfort levels or even our nervous system capability. In fact, one way we can begin to expand our nervous system capability bubble is by pushing outside of it. But here's the thing. It has to be done in a way that is perceived as safe and we have the capacity to recover from. And don't worry, I teach exactly how to do this in my program, because the reality is if we push too hard or if we aren't setting up the right safety first, it can backfire, and you've probably experienced this before, right? If you have just been like, screw it, I'm going to try this, and then it bites you in the ass. We've all been there. But know this, if you can just walk away with any one thing from today's video, it is that all of these bubbles can grow again at any time. It is never, ever, ever too late. The only question becomes, are you willing to? Because when you do, that is when you get your freedom back. That is when you get back to the things you used to love. Or if you don't even know what those things are, like we talked about at the beginning, you get to discover them. You get to go cake tasting. That is when you get to experience the whole human experience in all of its totality, including all of the ebbs and flows of life. And this is the richness of life as a self-partnered powerhouse. Now, I have one more video coming for you, and in this video, we're really going to be pulling all these concepts together, and I'll show you exactly how you can bring in these elements into your life. Because when you do this, you can have your cake and eat it too. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.